Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be talking about something I think we all take for granted, wastewater treatment.
Yeah, it really is something you just don't think about.
Like when you flush the toilet, do you ever really consider what happens next?
I know I don't.
But maybe we should. All of that water,
Yeah.
it goes on a journey and turns back into clean water somehow, right?
Exactly. And it's a surprisingly complex process, to ensure public health and protect the environment.
So maybe we should start with the basics. What is wastewater exactly?
Yeah.
And where does it all come from? I mean, I think most people could just say the toilet, but it's obviously got to be more than that.
Well, yeah, it's a little more complicated than that. It's any water that's been used by people.
So like everything that goes down our drains at home.
Yeah, like the water from our sinks, showers, washing machines, dishwashers.
Oh, and the toilet, of course.
Of course. But it's not just our homes. It also includes discharges from industries and businesses.
Really? So like factories and stuff are contributing too.
Absolutely. And even rainwater runoff from streets and parking lots gets added to the mix.
Huh. I never thought about rainwater as wastewater, but I guess it makes sense. It picks up all sorts of stuff as it flows over surfaces.
Right. It carries pollutants from those surfaces, and that all ends up contributing to the wastewater that needs to be treated.
So you got this mixture of, well, I guess everything we flush and wash away, plus industrial discharges and even rainwater. That can't be good for the environment, right?
No, not at all. It would be a huge problem if all of that wastewater was just dumped back into rivers and lakes without any treatment.
That's where wastewater treatment plants come in, right?
Exactly. They're designed to remove all those pollutants and harmful organisms before the water is released back into the environment.
So how does that work? Where does all this wastewater go, and what happens to it at the treatment plant?
Okay, so think of it this way. Underneath our cities, there's this huge network of pipes and tunnels. It's like a hidden world carrying wastewater from homes, businesses, and everything else.
So it's like a giant plumbing system.
Pretty much. And this network collects all that wastewater and transports it to a wastewater treatment plant.
Okay, so the wastewater reaches this plant. Is it like a giant filter that magically makes it clean again?
Well, I wish it was that simple. It's actually a series of steps, and each step targets a different type of pollutant.
Okay, walk me through it. What happens first?
So the first step is kind of like a pre-cleaning. They remove large debris like rags, sticks, even plastic.
Wow, I guess people really do flush all sorts of crazy stuff down the toilet.
You wouldn't believe some of the things they find. After that initial screening, the wastewater flows into settling tanks. This is where the heavier stuff settles to the bottom.
Like what kind of stuff?
Well, things like sand, grit, and also solids, which they call sludge.
Sludge, that sounds delightful.
It's not the prettiest part of the process, but it's important. This sludge is actually collected and processed separately.
What happens to it?
It can actually be used to produce biogas, which is a type of fuel.
So even the sludge has a purpose.
That's right. Nothing goes to waste, ideally.
Okay, so we've removed the big stuff in the sludge. What about the water that's left?
That's where things get really interesting. Organic pollutants.
Dissolved organic pollutants.
Things like, the stuff we can't see from soap, food, and human waste.
So how do you remove things you can't see?
That's where the tiny heroes of wastewater treatment come in bacteria.
Bacteria, like the stuff that makes us sick.
Not all bacteria are bad. In fact, certain types of bacteria are actually essential for cleaning wastewater.
Oh, I see. So how do these good bacteria help?
Well, they basically eat those dissolved pollutants as their food source, breaking them down into harmless substances.
Wow, so it's a natural process.
Exactly. And to help these bacteria thrive, they actually pump air into the tanks.
Why air?
The bacteria need oxygen to survive and multiply, just like us.
So it's like creating a giant buffet for bacteria, and then they clean up the mess.
Pretty much.
But is the water actually clean at this point? Like, could you drink it?
Not quite yet. It's much cleaner, but it still needs a few more steps before it's safe to be released back into the environment.
Like what?
Well, they usually filter it through layers of sand and gravel. It's like a final polish to remove any remaining particles.
The
last step is disinfection. They add chlorine or use other methods to kill any harmful bacteria or viruses that might still be lurking.
So that's to ensure it's safe for the environment.
Exactly. And once the water has gone through all of these steps, it can be discharged back into rivers, lakes, or even used to replenish groundwater supplies.
Wow. That is a lot more complicated than I ever imagined. From flushing to clean water, it's quite a journey.
It is, and it's a process that most people don't even think about, but it's absolutely essential for protecting our health and our environment.
I think you're right. So, knowing what we know now, is there anything we can do at home to help make this process more efficient? I mean, like, are there things we should avoid flushing down the toilet or pouring down the drain?
That's a great question, and you'd be surprised at how much of an impact our everyday choices can have.
All right, give us the insider tips. What should we absolutely not be sending down the drain?
Okay, so first and foremost, no cooking oil or fats down the drain.
Really? Why not?
Yeah.
I've definitely poured oil down the drain before.
It might seem like a liquid, but it solidifies in the pipes and causes clogs.
Oh, right. That makes sense.
What else? Chemicals. Things like paint, solvents, insecticides, even strong cleaning products. They can all disrupt the treatment process. They can harm the beneficial bacteria we were talking about.
Yikes. So those need to be disposed of properly, I guess.
Absolutely. And another big one's solid waste. Things like tea leaves, food scraps, cotton balls, all that stuff should go in the trash, not the drain.
Oh, yeah. My mom always yells at me for dumping tea leaves down the sink.
She's right to do so. All those solids can build up and clog the pipes, making the whole system less efficient.
Got it. Seems like being mindful of what we flush and pour down the drain is actually pretty important.
It really is. Small changes in our daily habits can make a big difference in the long run.
This has been incredibly enlightening. It's amazing how such a seemingly simple act like flushing the toilet is actually connected to this whole complex world of wastewater treatment.
Right. It really highlights how interconnected everything is and how our actions, even at home, can have an impact on the environment.
Okay, so we've got a good picture of what happens to wastewater in areas with centralized sewer systems. But what about places that don't have that infrastructure? What happens then?
That's a great question and something we will be exploring in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. So before the break, we were just about to dive into what happens in areas where there isn't a centralized sewage system.
Yeah. It's really interesting to think about, actually, because we're so used to, just flushing and forgetting.
Exactly. But obviously not everyone has access to those big wastewater treatment plants we talked about. So what are the alternatives?
Well, one common solution, especially in more rural areas, you see septic systems.
Septic systems. I've heard of septic tanks. Aren't they just like big underground tanks for wastewater?
Kind of, but they're actually more than just holding tanks. They're like mini wastewater treatment plants right on your property.
Whoa, mini treatment plants in people's backyards. That's wild. So how do those work?
So basically, all the wastewater from your house, it goes into this big tank that's buried underground. It's usually made of concrete or fiberglass.
Okay, so it's like a big container. And then what?
Inside the tank, the wastewater naturally separates. The heavier stuff sinks to the bottom, just like in those big settling tanks at a treatment plant.
Right, so the sludge ends up at the bottom again.
Exactly. And then the lighter stuff, like oil and grease, that floats to the top.
And the stuff in the middle.
That's the partially treated wastewater. That flows out of the tank and into something called a drain field.
A drain field. Is that literally a field full of drains?
Not exactly. It's more like a series of underground trenches. They're filled with gravel or other porous material.
Okay, so the wastewater flows through these trenches. Why?
Because as the wastewater slowly moves through the drain field, the soil acts as a natural filter.
Ah, so the soil helps to remove even more pollutants.
Yep. And eventually that treated wastewater is absorbed back into the ground.
Wow, that's actually really clever. Using nature to do the filtering.
Right. It's a very sustainable solution. But it only works if there's enough land available for a drain field.
Makes sense. What about places where land is limited, or maybe the soil isn't suitable? What are the options then?
Well, another option is a composting toilet.
Composting toilet. That sounds interesting. How exactly does a toilet compost?
It's pretty cool, actually. It's all about using natural decomposition processes to break down the waste.
So instead of flushing, what do you do?
The waste goes into a composting chamber where it gets mixed with things like sawdust or coconut coir.
Wait, so it's literally making compost from human waste. Isn't that a bit, gross?
It might sound weird, but it's actually very hygienic when done properly. The composting process, with the help of microorganisms and good ventilation, it eliminates odors and breaks down pathogens.
So it's actually safe.
Mm-hmm.
And the end result is compost that can be used for gardening.
Yep. It's a closed-loop system, turning waste into a resource. Pretty amazing, right?
That's wild. It's making me rethink what's possible with waste management.
Yeah.
Are there any other, even more, out there alternatives?
Believe it or not, there's something called a vermi-processing toilet.
Vermiprocessing. Okay, you're losing me a little. What is that?
Vermiprocessing uses earthworms to break down the waste.
Earthworms.
Yeah.
Like the ones we find in the dirt. They can handle that.
They're surprisingly good at it. The toilet is designed so that the waste goes into a chamber where there are tons of earthworms.
And the earthworms just, like, eat the waste.
Pretty much. And they turn it into nutrient-rich compost. It's a super efficient and odorless way to treat human waste.
Wow. So we've got septic systems that filter through soil, composting toilets that use decomposition, and even earthworms getting in on the action. It's incredible how many different approaches there are.
I know, right? It's really inspiring to see how people are finding sustainable solutions even without access to those big centralized systems.
It really is. But, earlier you mentioned something about rainwater runoff being considered wastewater. Can we talk about that a bit more?
Sure, it's something that's often overlooked, but it's becoming increasingly important, especially with climate change and more intense rainfall events.
So what makes rainwater runoff a problem? I mean, it's just rain, right?
It's not just water. Think about when it flows over streets, parking lots, rooftops. It picks up all kinds of pollutants along the way.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, you've got oil and gasoline from cars, fertilizers and pesticides from lawns, litter, even animal waste.
Ugh. Yeah, that doesn't sound good.
Yeah.
And all that stuff ends up in our rivers and lakes.
Exactly. So managing stormwater runoff is crucial for protecting water quality.
So how do we do that? Do we treat it the same way we treat wastewater from our homes?
Not necessarily. One of the most effective approaches is something called green infrastructure.
Green infrastructure. Does that mean we build, like, green buildings that treat water?
It's more about using nature-based solutions, things like rain gardens, green roofs, and permeable pavements.
Okay, break those down for me. What's a rain garden?
A rain garden is basically a shallow depression that's planted with native vegetation. It's strategically placed to collect rainwater runoff from roofs, driveways, and streets.
So it's like a little garden designed to soak up the water.
Exactly. The plants and the soil help to filter out pollutants, and then the water slowly soaks back into the ground.
So it's like a natural sponge that cleans the water. I love that. What about green roofs? I've seen those popping up in cities.
Green roofs are rooftops that are partially or fully covered with vegetation.
So basically gardens on rooftops. I bet those help with the runoff too.
They do. They absorb a lot of rainwater, so less of it ends up in the storm drains. Plus, they help to cool buildings down and reduce energy use.
Wow, it's like a win-win-win. What was the last one you mentioned? Permeable pavements.
Yeah. Permeable pavements are made of materials that allow water to seep through them instead of just running off.
So the water goes through the pavement instead of into the gutters.
Yep. It's a great way to reduce runoff, filter pollutants, and help replenish groundwater.
This is all so fascinating. We've gone from flushing toilets to talking about green roofs and pavements. It's incredible how everything is connected and how we can use nature-inspired designs to solve problems.
Absolutely. It's all about finding sustainable solutions and recognizing the value of natural processes.
Speaking of sustainability, earlier we talked about how millions of people around the world still lack access to basic sanitation. What are some of the things being done to address that global crisis?
There are a lot of great initiatives out there. One inspiring example is the Swachh Bharat mission in India.
Swachh Bharat. I think that means clean India, right?
You got it. It's a national campaign aimed at improving sanitation and hygiene across the country.
What are they doing specifically?
Their main goals are to eliminate open defecation, build toilets, promote hand washing, and really raise awareness about the importance of sanitation.
It sounds like a huge undertaking. Are they making any progress?
They've actually made incredible progress. Since it started in 2014, they've built millions of new toilets and significantly reduced open defecation. It's a really inspiring example of what can be achieved when governments and communities work together.
It really is. It shows that access to clean water and sanitation isn't just about infrastructure. It's also about changing behaviors and social norms.
You're absolutely right. And that leads to an important question. If sanitation is a human right and crucial for global health, how can we all support initiatives like Swachh Bharat and make sure everyone has access to these essential services?
That's a great question to think about, especially as we consider what the future holds for wastewater treatment. Speaking of which, in the last part of our deep dive, we'll be exploring some exciting new innovations and discussing how we can all contribute to a cleaner, healthier world. Welcome back to our deep dive. So, we've learned about how wastewater is treated, the challenges of sanitation in areas without centralized systems, and some pretty amazing alternative approaches. Now, I'm curious, what about the future? Where is all this headed?
Oh, the future of wastewater treatment. It's a really exciting time to be talking about this, actually,
So
because we're starting to see a shift in thinking. It's not just about getting rid of waste anymore. It's about seeing wastewater as a resource.
resource, what do you mean?
Well, think about all the valuable stuff that's in wastewater, nutrients, energy, even water itself. We can recover those things and use them again.
So instead of just treating it and dumping it, we can actually get something useful out of it.
Exactly. It's all about closing the loop, creating a more circular economy.
Okay, I like that. So where are we seeing this idea of wastewater as a resource playing out? What are some of the big areas of innovation?
One really promising area is decentralized wastewater treatment systems.
Decentralized. So instead of those huge treatment plants, you're talking about smaller, more localized systems.
Right. Imagine smaller treatment units in neighborhoods or even individual homes. That way, we wouldn't need those massive pipe networks to transport wastewater over long distances.
That makes sense. Less transportation means less energy used, right? But wouldn't it be super expensive to have all these mini treatment plants everywhere?
The cost is actually coming down as the technology improves. And when you consider the long-term savings on infrastructure, they can actually be quite cost-effective.
Interesting. So what kind of technologies are making these decentralized systems possible?
One really cool development is membrane bioreactors.
Membrane bioreactors. That sounds intense. What are those?
They're like super efficient filters. They combine biological treatment with advanced filtration to remove even the tiniest pollutants. We're talking bacteria and viruses.
Wow. So the water that comes out of those is super clean.
Extremely clean. In some cases, it can even be clean enough to reuse for things like irrigation or flushing toilets, maybe even eventually drinking water with additional treatment.
Whoa. That's amazing. It's like turning wastewater into a valuable commodity. Any other cool technologies on the horizon?
Definitely. Artificial intelligence and machine learning are starting to play a bigger role in wastewater treatment.
AI for wastewater. That's wild. What does that look like?
Imagine sensors throughout a treatment plant collecting all sorts of data, water quality, energy use, the performance of different processes.
Okay, lots of data. Then what?
AI algorithms can analyze all that data in real time. They can optimize the treatment processes, detect problems early, even control systems automatically.
So it's like having a super smart brain managing the whole system.
Pretty much, AI can make wastewater treatment way more efficient and sustainable.
Wow. This is all so fascinating. It seems like the future of wastewater treatment is about way more than just cleaning up what we flush down the toilet. It's about resource recovery, innovation, and using technology to create a more sustainable future.
Exactly. It's a field that's constantly evolving, and I'm really excited to see what the future holds.
Me too. This deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on wastewater treatment, and honestly, it's made me way more aware of my own water use and the impact it has.
That's great to hear. It's all about understanding the connections,
Yeah.
What we do at home, the choices we make, they all have ripple effects.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this fascinating world. It's been a real pleasure learning from you.
The pleasure was all mine. I hope everyone listening learns something new and maybe even feels inspired to make a difference. Even small changes can have a big impact.
And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful, maybe even a little bit inspiring. Until next time, keep those minds curious. And remember, everything is connected, so let's make those connections count.